Welcome to this is our third VINEX live chat with key people around the world, looking at the impact of the COVID-19 outbreak. And this week we're turning our focus on China, which clearly is been through it and started it, and potentially is coming through the other side of it. So we're lucky this morning to be joined by two people from two different parts of the industry. Well, one's actually permanently in the wine industry, Campbell Thompson from Wine Republic, which is Campbell can explain a little bit more detail, but a wine importer agency business in China. And Michael Boddington, who actually works across a number of agricultural products and sort of food, meat, and some wine, and also whiskey importing into China. So is well placed to look at the overall picture, really, in terms of how things are developing. So can I just kick off by asking you to both introduce yourselves and give a little bit of heads up on your own company? So Campbell, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you, Richard. So my company, the Wine Republic, was established in Beijing almost 12 years ago. And today we have offices in 4 cities around China. Okay. We work with about 38 brands, wine brands from 6 countries. We import and distribute and sell through a number of different channels. Up until recently, on-premise was about 50% of our total business, or slightly below 50%. Okay. And with sub-distribution, online, and direct to consumer being the other key channels. Obviously, as we'll discuss in just a moment, there's been some change to our mix of channels and to what's actually working at the moment. So we work with branded wine and mostly at sort of middle to higher average price points.
Okay, so you're kind of quite omni-channel to some extent, then, really. You're quite well. Yeah.
Yeah, we are. We started 12 years ago with a fairly strong focus on the on-premise. Yeah. The idea at that time was that the on-premise was still a way in which to build credibility with Chinese consumers, yeah, who were still learning a lot about wine and didn't know much about wine outside of Bordeaux First Growth, and maybe and Penfolds would be the second brand that they have awareness of. And we really focused on working with family-owned and smaller, high-quality producers and introducing those wines to that better established channel of the on-premise. But over the last few years, we have been expanding beyond that. Maybe not as fast as we should have, but anyway, again, we'll get into that topic of channel mix and so forth very soon. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, Michael, if I turn to you then, because your experience is a bit more wide-ranging in terms of the categories that you cover. Do you want to just give us a heads up on what your role is in China?
Yeah, thanks, Richard, and welcome. I'm lucky enough to be here in Beijing. We have a couple of companies. One is Asian Agribusiness Recruitment, Training and Development. We're a recruitment company in the agribusiness space, so we work very closely with a number of agribusinesses there finding talent. We also have another company called Asian Agribusiness Consulting, and that's a market research and consulting business that looks across the broader agribusiness space. So we cover areas such as food, meat. We look at wine. We also have an active role in the whiskey industry, where we have a small business that imports premium whiskey from Scotland into China. So we look at the broader industry. We look at things like e-commerce and its activity, and we look at consumer preferences and consumer behaviour towards purchasing as well.
Okay, so you're in a way you're ideally placed to kind of give us an overview really on what's actually happened in China. Then, I mean, can you sort of give your personal perspective on how the outbreak has really hit business and what it's been through, what the different stages have been?
Yeah, look, I think now we're in April 21, and January 25, it was the start of Chinese New Year, and prior to that, Wuhan had been closed, and we were in Beijing and Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou. We're sort of just understanding what was happening, and over that Chinese New Year period, that's when everything closed down, and it was that immediate first month after close down where we saw really the decimation of the food service, the F&B industry. Just restaurants were closed, people weren't able, didn't want to go out. And it's at that point, that's just when e-commerce really started to grow. And when we look at the first week of that Spring Festival period, that week after the 25th of January, e-commerce registrations were up 56% on that week, and then 2 weeks later they were up another 96%. So it's in this period where e-commerce has really started to get some traction, because people still had to eat, but people didn't feel confident about going out, and so much more confident about going online, ordering, and then having something delivered to the apartment building, and then doing the necessary precautions to bring that inside.
Because I suppose China has an incredibly well-connected sort of a lot of the business they do online anyway, don't they, with the WeChat and I mean, do you think that helped, the fact that so many people in China kind of live their lives a little bit through their smartphones in any case, or?
Yeah, look, I think, yeah, look, Richard, sorry, but I think, you're right. China's a jump ahead. The ecosystem, really lends itself to e-commerce, and, that last 100 or 200 meters that you've got to do to get the delivery, like there's that motorbike or that push bike that can bring the delivery, the small trucks that are able to navigate the small streets, and obviously the networks that are there. Also, China's been, practicing e-commerce for a good period of time as well. So the centralized warehousing has already been established, so you can have this web of e-commerce platforms that can draw from a centralized warehouse to deliver to those consumers.
And from a sort of wine perspective, or just the supply chain perspective, were products able to get moved around the country? I mean, I guess you must have had stock in the country, but were people able to, across, well, obviously wine being a packaged good, or and fresh goods as well that you deal with, or what was the supply chain situation?
Well, at the start, it was very challenging. Campbell, you might be able to share a little bit more light on this one.
Look, definitely some challenges and a lot of uncertainty as to what was possible. But what we found out over a period of time is that there weren't, outside of Wuhan and the epicenter of the crisis, outside of that area, it was generally possible to get logistics services to move products where we needed to. Okay. Much greater issue was the drop off in demand for that wine. So honestly, it wasn't such a.
You didn't see a big uplift in wine e-commerce sales necessarily.
Yeah, and just to add, I agree with all the points that Michael made. One additional point. One of the reasons that China is so far in front of most of the world with e-commerce, and how that relates to wine, the way in which alcohol is regulated in China is relatively relaxed compared to, say, the US or Australia or most other major markets. There are not so many restrictions on selling wine, so you can literally, very easily in Beijing, you can order a pizza and a case of beer or a pizza and a bottle of wine and have it delivered, without the regulatory, the restrictions on sales that you get in other markets. So it just becomes a matter of cost and convenience, and a lot of consumers in China now regularly order alcohol that way, together with food.
So what impact did you have then for your business in sort of January, February time? I mean, did it kind of fall off a cliff, or were you able to sort of move into push more into DTC and keep going that way?
Definitely. I mean, so pre the announcement of the virus in late January, things were pretty normal in the build up to Chinese New Year. Then China goes quiet for Chinese New Year anyway. And then there was already an awareness of the impact of the crisis before people were due to come back from holidays, which of course most people didn't actually come back. Yeah. So that break was then extended out. So basically our month of February, we achieved, I think, 20% of our original budget. And pretty much all of that was in direct to consumer and online sales. Okay. Trade, sales to the on-premise basically fell off a cliff, and to a lot of retailers as well. There was a dramatic drop. Also, it's worth pointing out that the China wine market is quite cyclical, and a lot of retailers and sub-distributors and probably on-premise accounts as well do stock up a little bit before Chinese New Year in expectation of larger sales through that period. For many people, Chinese New Year was a bit disappointing. It was a bit of a lackluster Chinese New Year anyway. So the other, and then also a lot of restaurants particularly in Shanghai, have expanded their wine lists and their offerings over the last year, particularly with the, now that Michelin is publishing a guide on Shanghai, there's a lot more people who are conscious of that and so built bigger wine lists. A lot of those restaurants, once they did reopen, they simply took out the pencil and just started striking off wines that they didn't have. And many, of course, were also selling off their wine stock to private customers in order to generate.
The restaurants, were restaurants able to deliver at that stage, or whether it was an opportunity for them to change their business models, or did they just literally shut up shop?
A lot of restaurants did quickly move. Sorry, a lot of restaurants have always had delivery as part of their offering.
Okay.
People at the very top end of the market, it's a little bit more difficult, and destination dining and hotel restaurants struggle to do that. A lot of the mid-market restaurants have always done delivery, and that was the saving grace for them. That was the one thing that they could do.
Okay.
And so they put a lot more effort into doing that.
Well, should we come back to that? So, I mean, if we come back to that later in the conversation about where we go on from here. I mean, just looking at the actual sort of January, February time when you were sort of in the real, eye of the storm, as it were, because I guess both of you weren't actually working in China then, were you? You were both outside the country. So what kind of, how are you able to carry on doing business, and how hard was that for you to keep things going when you weren't actually present in the country? Michael, do you want to kick off?
Well, our office was probably no different to everyone else's office. So we were working from home.
Yeah, of course.
So, and calls like this, we'd have at least two calls a week, sometimes 3 calls a week, just to review and keep everything on track. We're communicating with our clients this way. But then as it became a little bit clearer, let's say at the start of March, then we were able to go back to working 1 day on, 1 day off. On a rotation basis, with some strict rules, and the local building management audited you, made sure that you were doing these rules and adhering to them. So that went on. So we took a rotation basis. Now we're able to go back into the office. That was since April 7. So given the restrictions, I think it's 2.5 meters per person, social distancing space, no shared coffee, no shared water, temperature checks, historical temperature checks as well, hand wash and mask on the whole time. At the eye of the storm, it was communication, but all remote. But then we're able to go through that rotation stage and then move back with social distancing. So that's a real relief at the moment. Yeah,
well, it's fascinating for us to hear. Well, for me, living in London, just to hear how other countries are, and for yourself, Campbell, how are you able to keep business moving?
Yeah, I mean, like Michael, moving everything to online with staff working from home. For me, having 4 offices in China, even when I'm there, I'm still managing a lot of my staff by remote.
Sure.
Anyway, that said, the biggest difference is that normally when I'm in China, I'm moving around a bit and meeting with different clients in different cities. I'm sure as Michael does. Of course, now I've had this extended break where I'm not able to be in touch with anyone. But honestly speaking, if I was in Beijing at the moment, it probably wouldn't be that much. Up until April 7th, it would not have been much different. I would have been stuck in my apartment in Beijing. So I guess it's been okay being with a company that is able to do some of the work from home. That said, for logistics, we have found ways to keep the warehouse moving. We did have a couple of weeks where our Shanghai warehouse was completely locked down and nothing could move in or out. But that was really just 2 weeks out of 2.5 months. So we've been it's been
and is wine being able to come into China from Australia, from all its key import countries?
Yes, yes, it has, and we've been able to clear customs actually more smoothly than normal. I think customs are keen to allow business to continue as normal. They're not slowing anything down, and I guess they're not that busy at the moment either. I hear from friends in the industry that they've actually, in some sectors, they've actually seen an increase in shipments, particularly at lower price points, and that there is a little bit of exuberance for some real interest in Australian wine. Now with the pretty dramatic drop in the Australian dollar that we saw relative to the renminbi, I think there were a few people seeing an opportunity there. And then also, as it relates to Australian wine in China, there's a number of importers who are also importing wine as they apply for residence in Australia. So through the business migration program.
Yeah.
In order to qualify for that, they need to ship wine fairly regularly. So that does sort of help to maintain regular shipments in some parts of the market.
Okay, good. Because so just in terms of like looking now at, I guess, the recovery phase. I mean, I guess from what we understand, China is sort of going through, is opening up again. It's potentially, albeit step by step. I saw some research this morning from Kantar, which is suggesting of all the FMCG or kind of the grocery areas, you know, there's those that will have a kind of a V-shaped recovery and come back quite quickly, but they're kind of forecasting wine to be what they classify kind of a U-shaped recovery. So, you know, a big drop and unfortunately a kind of a longer time to come back. Is that the kind of sense you get in there, or what's the sort of the feeling in terms of how things are going to recover that quickly?
I guess what we're seeing is that it's very different channel by channel. For any brands that have been, you know, particularly reliant on selling to the quite sizable, you know, international hotel chain channel, that's actually quite a big part of the total market in China. On-premise has been, for a long time in China, has been a bigger share of the total than for most comparable Western markets. So for anyone that's been overly reliant on dealing with the hotels, I think they're in for a very slow and painful recovery. And accounts receivable and payment terms are going to be a key part of that discussion with the hotels, because all of that's being dragged out now. I think for the more casual, you know, sort of dining and wine bars, I think there is, there was an immediate sort of, once the restrictions were lifted in Shanghai, I think the wine bars, the first couple of weekends that people could go out again, wine bars and casual dining did roaring trade in Shanghai and probably in a few other cities, just because people had been cooped up. But I think, look, it's going to be a slower recovery for the more traditional, for retail and for more traditional on-premise. But if anyone that's able to sell direct to consumer and online, I think there are still opportunities, but they are quite price sensitive.
Yeah.
And I think margins will be quite thin for some of those deals.
Yeah, that sort of premiumization's had a real hit, I suppose, for obvious reasons. So Michael, from your point of view, I mean, how are you seeing the recovery phase? I mean, you're obviously back in Beijing now. I mean, what's the feeling there across all categories, I suppose, but if you can sort of look at wine as well?
Yeah, look, I think if you look at, you know, meat, you know, imported pork, imported beef, it's all moving through the supply chain, albeit instead of it going into those five-star hotel, that premium food service that Campbell's talking about, more of it's going into home consumption, more being consumed at e-commerce. Wine, obviously, as Campbell's following, and also we're seeing whiskey. We're seeing whiskey has recovered and at the premium end. As well. So, you know, maybe people are not going out and not consuming at a premium end at a food service establishment or at a bar, but they'll be willing enough to buy and consume at home at a premium product.
So you see, because obviously there's a lot of talk actually in America and in Europe in terms of how quickly the on-trade can come back. Once sort of the lockdown rules are kind of restricted, there's a sort of I guess a hope that somehow someone's ever going to rush back to bars and restaurants. But is the feeling actually it's going to be a lot slower, and a cautiousness amongst the consumer?
Yeah, look, in my view, and Campbell will probably add a bit more flavour to this, but it's happening, but it's happening it's not just flicking a light switch and turning it on,
Exactly.
turning it on tomorrow. Because remember, a lot of those places have shut down, and the staff are not there, and those businesses don't exist anymore. So that's one factor of it. They can't. They can't be occupied at the same rate. There's restrictions. I think it's 3 people per table, and then they've got to have social distancing as well. And they're also not able to be open for the same length of hours as they were before. So there's all these different type of restrictions, which just means it's just a gradual. It's not a trickle, but it's not a waterfall.
Right. Okay. And Campbell?
Yeah. So I definitely think there's as recovery continues, it's not going to be going back to the old normal, and we don't quite know what the new normal looks like. Some of the things, some of the observations we can share would be that, firstly, there's quite a bit of talk that people that were already interested in wine spent some of their time at home, learning a bit more, reading a bit more widely. Okay. Anyone that was enrolled in a WSET course, and there's large numbers of people in China, consumers who pay their own money to study WSET. A lot of those people use some of the available extra time to study and to share and maybe learn a bit more. So maybe there is a small but significant group of people that were coming out of the crisis with actually more interest in small batch and in small producers and interest in wines. Yeah. Another point would be that in China, the BYO laws are quite different from other countries, and in most cases, it's really not possible to restrict a customer from bringing wine into a restaurant. Now that people are used to buying more wine and storing a bit of wine at home, I wonder whether restaurants will see more people walking in with a bottle of wine in their hands. Another point would, as Michael mentioned, restaurants are restricted to the number of people per table and the number of tables in the restaurant space. They have to create a lot more free space around the diners. Yeah. This actually, in a strange way, actually works in favour of Western restaurants, because a typical Chinese restaurant is often used for celebrations and banquets, 8 people around a circular table. Well, you can't do that now, and having a big circular table with only 3 people on it doesn't quite feel right. So the types of restaurants and the concepts that are working quite well are more sort of the mid-market international cuisine, as well as some of the more sort of modern approaches to Chinese cuisine. And of course, Chinese cuisine can be served, plated. It can be done in different ways, and there are some people doing that. But that traditional Chinese restaurant with big round tables with 8 people shoulder to shoulder, that's definitely not allowed at the moment. So it's working in favor of other food concepts, and maybe some of the wines that go alongside of that, like Italian food, in terms of price point, quality, and how it's served, and the space in a restaurant, I think is proving to be quite popular. So I wonder if there is an opportunity for Italian wine to be sold alongside of that.
Yeah. And is there a little bit of that, the fact that people can't travel, but in a way you could go to Italian restaurants, or you can try different cuisines? Do you think that'll come into play a little bit in terms of the Western?
I certainly hope so. The idea that if you can't get on an aeroplane, but you can have those different experiences in your own city. And a city like Beijing and Shanghai, there's actually a very wide range of cuisines available. Yeah. I really hope that happens. I can't say that we've seen any solid evidence that it is happening, but I certainly hope so. Yeah. I do hear from people as well that, as with every country in the world, where people are experiencing lockdown, people are cooking at home and maybe exploring new dishes and new flavors as well. So maybe in China, I think there's a little bit more interest in international cuisine amongst the broader local market. So I do hope that is a little bit of a silver lining for us, and that there are a greater number of people looking at different wine styles and different countries.
Okay. And I mean, can you put a proportion on how many restaurants and bars are now back open again in the major cities? Is it sort of 30%, 50%, or?
I'll be interested in Michael's view on this. My understanding is that in both Beijing and Shanghai, it's closer to, sorry, for the wine accounts that we work with, leaving out neighborhood Chinese restaurants and others, but probably 95%. And our feeling is that the ones that have not reopened, very few of them will actually reopen. There's still a couple that have refurbishing or delayed their opening, but the vast majority now have reopened. They just haven't ordered wine from us. That's the downside.
Fair enough. And Michael, what are you seeing in Beijing then?
Oh, look, probably share Campbell's views on that. I think as you look in the centre of the city, in downtown Beijing, in the business area, it's probably more restaurants have opened. But when you come out to the outer fringes, it's probably less of those restaurants have opened. There's a few, obviously, exceptions, but they would see a higher concentration of openings in downtown versus out in the suburbs.
Okay, great. I mean, it's a great conversation. It's fascinating talking to you, because it's, for us, we can read news reports and stuff, but to actually hear directly from people working in China, it's fascinating. But just in terms of the time we've got left, I mean, can we look at sort of, I know it's hard because obviously you're still very much at the beginning of all this recovery, but kind of what lessons and what long-term views do you think you'll see, in terms of how the industry will come back, and what the long-term picture might be, and just in terms of consumer behaviour? And I mean, do you see in a year's time we're all back to normal again, or do you see this as having a fundamental change to how we all work and live and the industries we're in? Michael, do you want to go?
Yeah, look, happy to go. Look, I think the importance of understanding your customer and dealing direct with your customer, and having let's say a shorter supply chain is going to be important going forward. So building a brand, building a presence, and building that trust. So when a consumer is looking online on what to buy, they want to know who's selling it to them, and also if you're looking at food, how it's produced. If you're looking at wine, where it's coming from, and the history in terms of the association of that. So, what are the lessons? The lessons really are the value of building a brand and really building your presence in a market.
It's interesting, because I mean, obviously that trend of authenticity and traceability has sort of been there before, but you kind of see that becoming even more cemented in our lives.
Yeah, look, I think it's evolving. When you go online to buy something, you just see that product. So that product's got to have a story, and people have got to know something about that to really pull them towards it. So, that just, the traceability is something that's talked about, and it's a nice story, but each year, and we go more and we evolve more and more about our understanding of traceability, understanding about what it really means, and understanding how important that is to a brand.
Okay, and Campbell, the same question to you really, but perhaps you could look at from the point of view of wine buyers and producers watching this. Where do you see the kind of long-term recovery for China, and what that means for wine producers hoping to do business there?
My feeling is that China is going to be one of the first markets to really move into recovery phase. And for many producers around the world, China is going to be a very, very important market for that reason. Yeah. It might give them a boost when sales into other major wine markets are still depressed. Yeah. And I think there's also going to be this whole crisis is a bit of a wake-up call for many people in the trade who, for understandable reasons, if you're a medium-sized wine producer and you're selling to multiple markets around the world, your actual level of understanding of who the end consumers are and who the different players along the chain is a bit limited. And really, we often rely on key relationships. It might be an exclusive importer in China. It might be a couple of regional distributors that you work directly with. But often we don't have enough information about who the end consumers are. what the channels are and what the mix is of channels. A lot of sales in China has happened through importers who have relationships, and they seem to move large volumes of wine, and it's all a bit mysterious to the winery. In many cases, some of those companies are going out of business, and business is tough for the importers. Many of them are very new to the business, and even if their business is surviving, they may decide, look, this wine caper is not for me, and I can put my funds and my efforts back into my other business activities. So I think for anyone who is looking at needing to change their distribution, it's a tough time to do it. You can't obviously just fly to China and meet people and sign up a new distributor. There's an urgency about getting into the key online and direct-to-consumer channels in China. Yeah. It's easy to say, but it's hard to do. It's we can't just say, oh, well, you just get onto Tmall and get onto Jingdong and sell your wine there, and everything will be fine. That is definitely part of the solution, but there's quite a lot of work to be done, and it's not all of it can be done by remote. So I think there's, for a lot of wine producers, definitely China is a part of the opportunity in what's going to be, I think, quite a difficult quarter or difficult year. But some of the strategies that we need to put in place are not all that easy to do. So my suggestion would be to start now and
start preparing.
Talk to people who know something about the business and do some research into, how do we get the wines online? How do we get into those direct-to-consumer channels?
Okay.
And then and don't be too reliant on a relationship-based importer who who's moved good volume in the past, but it's all a bit mysterious. And if that importer stopped stopped importing, that you'd lose all those customers too.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, a lot of times you talk to producers around the world at trade fairs, and they say, I want to do business in China, but I don't quite know how to do it, or unless you're already well established there. So perhaps this is the time when the energy and the need to do that is going to really come to the fore. Just as we kind of close, just a final thought from both of you to those of people watching this around the world. What would be your sort of takeaway that you'd give to people about how we might all see some sort of silver light at the end of all this? Michael, do you want to have a go at being Mr. Optimistic?
Well, look, I think the silver lining is we're going to learn something, something new about our business and about ourselves. Look, it's April 21 now, and it was January 25, so it's 3 months, in, and things are moving again in China. So the sun's going to come up every day, and it will get better, and it does get better. But I think for business and for ourselves, after this period, if we've got a better understanding of our business and a better understanding of our customer and a better understanding how to serve them in this new normal, I think that's a positive outcome if we can say there is one.
Great, thank you. And Campbell, the final word to you.
Yeah, I think in the longer term, we'll be able to look back and say, look, this crisis was the time when a lot of Chinese consumers, when consuming wine at home with their spouse, became the new normal. Because for a lot of people in China, wine is something that they consume when they're out. They're in a restaurant, they're celebrating something, but it's not something that they would always consume at home. So I think the part of the bigger opportunity of the China market is people consuming quality wine at home on a semi-regular basis. Hopefully, one of the silver linings can be that this crisis has encouraged that to occur.
Great, although that's a great point to finish on. Well, thank you very much indeed. I mean, it's been a real eye-opener for myself to hear all that, and best of luck to you both. And hopefully, I'll get a chance to see you at in China at one of the trade fairs in the coming years. So, best of luck. Thank you.